What's up, y'all? My name is Dan. So here I'm going to be talking about Delta Airlines transatlantic routes and destinations for summer 2022, as well as the aircraft that Delta is going to be using for these flights, and also a bit about some of their codeshare agreements in the area, similar to how I did with United American and Air Canada. This July, Delta is going to be flying about 531 weekly flights on 63 routes to 16 destinations in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, which is more flights than American Airlines, but fewer flights than United. The main hub for Delta's transatlantic operations is New York JFK Airport, where Delta will be flying 184 flights per week to 24 destinations in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. This includes twice daily flights to Amsterdam, Athens, London, Milan, Paris, and Rome. Many of these flights are mostly dependent on the local demand into New York, as well as the many domestic connections that the airline offers at this airport. Although Delta doesn't necessarily have it easy in New York because of the competition that it faces with American Airlines and their partnership with JetBlue, as well as United Airlines with their hub at Newark. Boston is another one of Delta's main transatlantic hubs, despite being a lot smaller than a lot of their other hubs. But Delta still flies to 60 destinations per week to 9 destinations, including 2 daily to Amsterdam. Boston also recently got flights launched thrice weekly to Athens and to Tel Aviv, as well as flights to San Diego, Denver, and other destinations to increase the connections that Delta offers at this airport, which might be attractive for passengers that might want to bypass other hubs like New York and Atlanta. And while there's also some heavy competition from JetBlue, Delta seems to have more flight frequencies into Boston. But JetBlue still carries the most passengers. Things might also get a little bit trickier as JetBlue begins their transatlantic flights out of Boston that might attract a lot of the local transatlantic demand. Atlanta, Delta's largest hub, where Delta flies about 20 daily flights to 14 destinations in Europe and Africa, including 3 daily flights to Amsterdam and twice daily to London, Paris, and Rome, as well as Delta's flight to Johannesburg and to Lagos. These flights are likely possible with the huge amount of connections that Delta offers at the airport, mainly into Florida, the southern US, and many destinations further west. Detroit, Delta's second largest hub, with 54 weekly flights to 5 destinations. This includes 3 daily flights to Amsterdam and 12 weekly flights to London, 1 daily to Paris, as well as daily flights to Frankfurt and Munich that likely have demand from the auto industry. And there's a lot of possible connections into the Midwest and other parts of the country. Minneapolis got 38 weekly flights, including 17 weekly flights to Amsterdam, as well as 1 daily to London, Paris, and Reykjavik. The latter is flown with a Boeing 757-200, being the only one of Delta's transatlantic routes being flown by a narrowbody. Connections are also possible from Minneapolis into many airports in the West and the Great Plains. Salt Lake City, the main hub for the Rocky Mountains, got 3 daily transatlantic flights, 1 to London, 1 to Amsterdam, and 1 to Paris. This isn't that big of a hub, but connections are possible into the Rockies and the western side of the country. Seattle is the main hub for the Northeast US, with 2 daily flights to Amsterdam, 1 to London, and 1 to Paris. This is supported by a lot of local demand from the city, but also connecting passengers from the West Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii. And lastly, one last flight that will be flying all summer is a flight from Portland, Oregon into Amsterdam once daily. Now, there are other routes that aren't flying this July, but are going to start later on. There's Cincinnati to Paris and Raleigh-Durham to Paris, both of which began in August this year. And there's Orlando to Amsterdam, which begins in October 30th, and it's a winter seasonal. The aircraft Delta will be flying in these routes include the Airbus A350-900, Delta's largest aircraft that will be used on only 3 routes, including Atlanta to Johannesburg as well as Detroit to Paris, and the thrice daily flight from Detroit to Amsterdam. The Airbus A330-900 and the Airbus A330-300 will be heavily used for flights mostly into cities like Amsterdam, Paris, Rome, Athens, and other cities from many other hubs, mainly from New York, Boston, and Atlanta. The Airbus A330-900 isn't nearly as used as the 300 in comparison, but the routes they will be operating are quite similar. While the A330-300 is the aircraft that will be used for most of these flights, the Airbus A330-200 are going to be used a lot less, mainly in some less busy routes, and also oftentimes as second or third flight in the flights to Amsterdam from New York, Salt Lake City, and Portland, Frankfurt to Detroit, Atlanta, and Detroit, as well as Salt Lake City to London, and Atlanta to Lagos. The Boeing 767-400ER are being used for the flights to London Heathrow from 6 of their hubs, as well as flights to Madrid, Nice, and Zurich from New York, and Madrid and Munich from Atlanta. The Boeing 767-300ER is mainly going to be based out of New York and Boston, and flies a lot of the thinner routes out of these 2 airports, as well as flights from Detroit to Munich, and from Atlanta to Milan and Venice. The Boeing 757-200 is going to be only flying 1 route, that being the seasonal flight from Minneapolis to Reykjavik. Now, the markets that Delta flies to include Amsterdam being the main destination in Europe, where Delta joint venture partner KLM has their main hub. Delta flies about 17 daily flights here from 9 airports, including Portland, Oregon, and Orlando, Florida. The latter is going to be resuming flights this October. Plus the 13 destinations that KLM flies to in the US that include both Delta hubs and other non-hub airports. Meanwhile, KLM offers connections in Amsterdam to places all over Europe and also in Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Paris is Air France's main hub, another joint venture partner that is in the same company as KLM. Delta flies 11 flights to Paris from 9 airports in the US, including Cincinnati and Raleigh-Durham. They are going to resume in August this year, while Air France flies to 15 cities from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, and similar to Amsterdam, Air France offers connections to many destinations in Europe and other places, though not nearly as many as KLM, but it does offer far more destinations in Africa than KLM does. Air France also has a flight from Paris Orly to New York, while Delta also has a seasonal flight from New York to Nice. So as we can see based on these maps, Delta seems to rely a lot on these two airlines to gain transatlantic market share, connecting passengers via Paris and Amsterdam with multiple daily flights and have Air France KLM to fly destinations further east. Mainly those destinations that might be too small for a direct flight on Delta. London is a huge financial hub with a lot of business demand. This is an important hub for US business travelers, so Delta flies about 10 flights here from 7 other hubs. This is also Virgin Atlantic's main hub, yet another joint venture partner that also flies to 11 cities in the US, mainly using point-to-point demand between the US and the UK, but also a few connections that are possible towards India, Africa, and Pakistan, while also operating seasonal flights to Orlando from Belfast, Edinburgh, and Manchester, as well as Manchester to Delta's hubs in New York and Atlanta. In the UK, Delta also flies from Edinburgh to Boston and New York. Delta flies to Milan, Venice, and Rome in Italy as well. These flights are supported by a lot of local demand, but also Delta's codeshare agreement with ITA Airways, which replaced the codeshare with the now defunct Alitalia, especially in ITA's hub in Rome. ITA also recently launched flights to other US cities, but it doesn't offer nearly as many connections as the previous mentioned airlines. But it's still quite a very important market because of all the local demand into the country. Other important destinations for the airline include Barcelona and Madrid in Spain, which got flights from New York and Atlanta, and where Delta has their codeshare partner Air Europa, which flies to Miami and New York from Madrid. Athens has flights from New York, Boston, and Atlanta, and is Sky Express main hub, where they offer domestic connections in Greece, while Delta also flies to other hubs in Europe like Frankfurt, Munich, Dublin, Lisbon, and Zurich, and others, as well as smaller cities like Prague, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and others, as well as being the main US airline flying between the US and Africa, with flights to Accra, Dakar, and Lagos from New York, and Johannesburg and Lagos from Atlanta. While Delta also has a codeshare partner in Africa, Kenya Airways, that flies to New York JFK from Nairobi. So as we can see, Delta has a big presence in the transatlantic market. Not sure if Delta is going to begin expanding in the future, since Delta always seems to be very careful when adding new markets and might prefer to add more frequencies to existing routes than to add new ones. But maybe in the future there might be a possibility for new flights to be added, but also to resume some of the flights that they used to fly, such as Cincinnati to Amsterdam, Indianapolis to Paris, and other flights as well. There is a fight with United Airlines on whether to operate flights to Cape Town. United wants to fly from Washington Dulles, while Delta wants to fly the triangular route between Atlanta, Johannesburg, and Cape Town, and then back to Atlanta. I can't say which airline is going to get the rights for the flight, but hopefully that's going to be resolved in the future. And well, as Delta gets even more aircraft, they'll likely begin adding more flights to destinations in Europe and maybe even grow the Boston hub to have a much more important role in the transatlantic market. Thanks for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If y'all got any comments, questions, or any feedback, y'all can leave a comment. That's all I got to say, and I'll see y'all later.